There's a story of Michelangelo. Most of us know some of his works, a famous, world-famous painter, sculptor, some of the most brilliant pieces in history that we have. But something that's a little bit unknown, that he was an architect. And at the age of 71, he was called upon to finish the Basilica of St. Peter in Rome. There had been 5 other architects before him, and for 40 years the project languished. He's finally called upon now to finish this amazing work. As he understood it, that's the actual place where God dwelled in his eyes. That's what he thought. So as he took the burden of this project at the age of 71, he begins to realize that he needs to gather a workforce. So he begins to travel all through Italy, interviewing potential workers. But to his dismay, most of the responses were more concerned about the paycheck than the project. So Michelangelo begins to wander through, and he ends up at a little village. And at the heart of the village, a project was being done, and from what he could gather, it looked like a basilica was being put up. And outside there was one worker, an old man, had a hoe, mixing concrete in the dirt. Some of you that have been to third world countries have probably seen that. And he's hoeing at the concrete. Michelangelo stands back and watches him, and he says, May I ask you a question? The old man pauses mid-hoe, saying, "Yeah, get on with it. Can't you tell I'm busy?" Michelangelo responds, "What are you doing?" The old man stops, turns, and looks. "I'm building a cathedral." Michelangelo hired him on the spot. It's so easy in our life to get tied down to the mundane, wrapped into hours after hours of work, or maybe raising kids that you put in so much time and effort, and it's hard to see it. I'm at the point in time now where my kids are leaving, so I'm realizing it much more of how valuable those moments were. But it's hard for us to grasp what we're doing. Have you ever stopped and asked that question as a church, as a community, as a people, as an individual? What are we building? Do we have the perspective to say, I'm building a cathedral while mixing concrete by yourself? I was struggling to try to understand how I could bring a topic to this closing of a chapter. In my head, it feels that way. The church is launching a 5-year vision, and we're making a step into the future, and it felt like I was sitting at the end of a chapter, and I wish that, as Tolkien did at the end of The Hobbit, as Bilbo Baggins and Gandalf are walking along the path, it hits him as like, I know how I'm going to end my book. And he lived happily ever after to the end of his days. Or maybe Charles Dickens, as he's wrapping up the Christmas Carol, now that Scrooge has been redeemed and they're celebrating this festival, eating the turkey. And so, as Tiny Tim always remembered, God bless us, everyone. So I kind of felt like, what can I do to kind of button up this end of this period this church has been in? And it's exciting. Things are happening. Momentum's building, and it's great to see new faces and new activities. We've been talking about legacies for the last, I don't know how many weeks, most of the summer, and it's been great. We've been hearing a lot of different ideas and topics. And this concept of provision kept running in my head, and there's 2 significant ones that I was looking at. One was our contribution requires something. The other one was God's provision. But how does this seemingly opposing concepts take place? Because I know what I'm bringing is way, way less than what God's bringing. How does this function? How does this work with it? And there's some verses that popped up to me that I would like for us to stand and to review this morning. Just go ahead and stand and we'll read through these. Because God writes in Luke, it says, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? If then you're not able to do so small a thing as that, why do you worry about the rest? Boy, that sounds great. That's a great verse, but hard to live. And then this one, out of Exodus chapter 25, God says to Moses, tell the Israelites to bring me an offering. You receive the offering from me from everyone whose heart prompts them to give. These are the offerings you are to receive. To pay attention here, this is what we expect next Sunday. Gold, silver, bronze, blue, purple, scarlet yarn, fine linen, goat hair, leave that one, ram skins, dyed red, another type of durable leather, acacia wood, olive oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil, fragrant incense, onyx stones, other gems to be mounted in the ephod and the breastplate. Then have them make me a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Make this tabernacle and all of its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show. The Lord is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will prepare him a habitation. My Father's God, and I will exalt him. Father God, we look at these verses. We see this dichotomy of our provisions and yours. Help us as we're stepping into this new chapter as a church to realize that we must rely on you. But you're also asking something. Help us to understand your words and help us to deal with these verses in a new way. In Messiah's name, amen. You may be seated. It starts out by this concept of don't worry, don't take a thought. That's so hard to do because we have life, we have responsibilities, we have people relying on us. Even as a church, we have this generational building and activity that has happened. We feel responsible for it. We're caretakers to something that's bigger than who we are and what we are, and it's easy for us to worry. I heard a rabbi once say, worry is dealing with tomorrow's problems on today's pasture. But we often try to do this, and it is worrisome. We want to do great things for God. We don't want to mess up. We don't want to drive things into the ground. But then we look at it as our role. And in America, we have a very unique concept of what it means to live. We have this whole idea that I work for the weekend. I was trying to think of an appropriate song for a Central Indiana audience, so I went with George Jones' It's Finally Friday. Sorry. But it's finally Friday. I'm free again. I got my motor running for a wild weekend. It's finally Friday. I'm out of control. Forget the work and blues and let the good times roll. Monday, I'll be hurting with my head in a vice. Tuesday, I'll be wondering if I'll ever survive. Wednesday and Thursday, I'll be slowly tuning in because Friday, I'll be revving up my motor again. We have this concept that we work for the weekend, or we work so we can retire. Like this whole idea is, I've got to work so I don't have to work. But is that what God establishes for man? Is that man's ultimate purpose in life is to work enough that you don't have to? Is that how you find purpose? If you won $1 million, would you feel more fulfilled because you don't have to now worry? But God creates the earth and says, I'm going to put man in it, put him in this garden, and I want him to work it and keep it. Avodah. I want you to avodah. Pre-fall, pre-sin, pre-death. I need you to work. Now, we talked about this word of avodah in the past. Maybe somebody remembers what it means. Anybody? It's one of those words that's changes your dynamics, and I'm still working through it and wrestling for it through myself. But avodah means work, but it also means worship. So in the Hebrew, when you read worship, God says, I need you to worship me. I want you to avodah me. So your work is your worship, and your worship is your work. We look at them as isolated events. When you look at verses that say, whatever your hand finds to do it to the glory of God. Why? Because it is. It's glorifying him in your activities. So, in the story of the Exodus, you really see this idea come to pass. He says to Moses, go tell Pharaoh, I want you to take my people so that they may worship me, avodah me. I need you to take your people to go worship me. But the king of Egypt said, Moses and Aaron, why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to your avodah. God's saying, come out and avodah me. Pharaoh's like, no, get back here and avodah me. And Pharaoh said, look at the people of the land are now numerous, and you are stopping them from working. They're stopping these people from worshiping me. Look at these pyramids. Look at all these temples at Karnak, Abu Simbel, all of these places. Look at this. Look at the architect that they're designing to lift me up into the heavens. So they stop the straw. Go get your own straw wherever you can find it, but your avodah will not be reduced at all. See, there's an interesting concept with avodah. In Hebrew, you have triliteral and biliteral roots. The root of the word. It's a 2 or a 3 character root that makes up the word. There is no vowels in Hebrew, so you read this without all the vowels are gone. At the root of it is aver. And aver means slave. Your worship or your work will be your worship, or it'll be your slavery. And now these children of Israel are slaves worshiping Pharaoh or working for Pharaoh, and God's saying, no, I'm going to bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I'm going to set you free from being slaves to them, and you can come out here and avodah me. But what your hand finds to do, we do for God. In the church world, it seems sometimes like it's slavery. The whole song, Easy Like Sunday Morning, ain't really true. It's tough. Sometimes we get overworked, overwhelmed. It can feel that way. Sometimes we're in this world where we're like going, what is real? But our perspective has to do with, are we worshiping God or not? Are we saying, this is what I'm doing for the glory of God? Because if not, it will be slavery. And that is so important as we look forward. Because if not, we will burn out and not fulfill what God is asking us. So God takes them out here into the desert. This is the promised land. 70% of the promised land looks like that. But he says, I want you to come out here, and I need for you to do something. I need you to come out here and build a sanctuary. I want you to create a space for me that I can come and dwell in it. But how do you take just free slaves, unqualified, that have no resources? How do you create a cathedral for God? Have you ever felt unqualified? God's like, hey, I'm going to send you to Africa. Hoorah. Yay. I don't speak Afrikanese. I don't know the culture. How? But God says, no, I need you to come out here and build a sanctuary. The rabbis asked an interesting question. They say, what would prevent God from dwelling in this sanctuary that he built? God told them, you build it, I'm going to make a habitation here. And they asked the question, what would they had to do for God not to have dwelt there? And they say, well, what about sin? Like, well, on their wedding night at Mount Sinai, they kind of had an adulterous affair with the golden calf. God still did it. What about unqualified? You know, you didn't have a priesthood yet. You didn't have anything yet. You didn't have no structure to it. Did that keep them? They were slaves. No, God still filled it. They didn't have a land yet. God's like, that's not a problem. We'll just create a movable tent. It's an interesting question. What would have prevented God from filling it? Now, in this concept, there's one thing that we keep overlooking: God. God will always provide for his will to be accomplished. Always. If it's his will, he will provide. It's to a point where we can't even comprehend the provision that is being put into place. If you start with the tabernacle, it's very interesting. We read through this. You see all the things that he's asking them to give. Ex-slaves just out of Egypt. Oh, by the way, that little diamond you have in your pocket jingling around, I need that. Maybe that gold and silver and bronze, I want to plate the entire interior of gold. And like, how? And you begin to think of, what would God need for them to be able to do this? I came up with 3 fairly simple things. I only need a ton or so of gold, 3 3/4 tons of silver, 2.5 tons of bronze, about $1 billion worth. You're in the desert, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. The lottery's getting big enough now, it's going to solve it. Taxes might take a lot of it. How in the world are these unqualified, just freed slaves going to do this? You want to talk about a big vision? I need you to build me a cathedral. Also, movable tent. So, he needs a world power. Where are you going to get that amount of resources without a world power? I need some place that they're going to gather the world's resources in boatloads, where their temples are lined with gold, where their houses have all the gems and anything you possibly need, fine linens, everything. I need a world power that they're able to get resources from. God's like, that's fine. Okay, when is this? This is going to be about 1500 BC. Therefore, let me back up 2,000 years before that. Okay, the Egyptian dynasty. And the Egyptian dynasty begins and gathers all these resources and starts. Do you realize how much God is sitting back in time? It talks about raising kings, establishing kingdoms. He doesn't just need a world power. He needs a religion that looks at gift giving as a way to appease the gods. Do you know in Egyptian mythology and Egyptian records, there is not one animal sacrifice to the gods? Most other ones, it's always offering some sort of life. But in Egypt, for some reason, they thought it would be smart to give the gods, I don't know, gold, silver, fine linens. But if we have a people that think a way to appease the gods is to give them our wealth, God's like, Not just that, I'm going to need a road. I'm going to need a highway where all of the world's goods intersect. I need the Silk Road to bring all these luxuries, fine linens that we need for this place, all the way out of China and Europe. I need that to intersect across the inside road because I need to have my incense for the altars. I need that to crisscross. I don't know. Let's put that somewhere in the middle of the Sinai Peninsula, just where these children of Israel are building a tabernacle so they can buy what they need. And God's like, world power, got it. World religion where they offer gifts to the gods, got it. Silk Road, Incense Road, right where we need it, absolutely. These ex-slaves, unqualified, God's like, build me a cathedral. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, up, leave my people, you and the Israelites, go avodah the Lord. Take your flocks and herds, and also bless me. The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise they said, we will die. So the people took their dough before the yeast was added and carried on their shoulders in kneading troughs wrapped in clothing. And the Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed towards the people, and they gave them what they asked for. Why? Because the people, the Egyptians, believed if we can give the God that is angry, think of the plagues, if we can give them an offering, he'll be appeased. And they plundered Egypt. What did God do? I don't know. Set up a world power. There's a religion that gives gifts to the gods. And the people are going, is God moving or not? We ask that question all the time. What is God doing for us? He's like, I don't know, the last 2,000 years, I kind of set this kingdom up for you. Had a road right where you needed it. But we don't see it because we're ex-slaves coming out of Egypt. And God's like, I've got so much for you. 2014, I went to Israel for the first time. Life-changing experience. I was looking at church as slavery, to be honest. My work had become slavery in a lot of ways. Sunday morning grind, eat you up and spit you back out. And I needed to go back and reevaluate some things. You weren't supposed to amen there. And so my wife and I were talking. I was in the fall of the year, and we're like, I think I need to go back to Egypt, or back to Israel. And she's like, well, you're not going without me. It's like, fine, we'll just all go. And we did. In a couple months, we had already taken flight to arrive in Israel. And I put these pictures here because we pretty much climbed every mountain and crossed every stream. We did not sing the song. Maybe we did, actually. But it was amazing. I finally, as an adult, and women, you probably understand this too, but men definitely, when things click, you understand what your role in life is, and everything comes together. You fight with that for a while. At least I did. I went to flight school, commercial pilot, teaching pilots how to fly. Wondered why in the world that's there, and was assistant pastor in a church, filling in. And I was wondering how in this world this is going to come together. How do you fly people at church? But what I did learn in aviation is how to do scenario-based training. Hello, how great is that for discipling? But now things have started to click together where I could do scenario-based training for the church in Israel. Wow. Lead tours, teach people. And everything was phenomenal. I was loving life and really diving into this, starting my master's in biblical archaeology, and the family was there, and it's exciting. It's a new world, new place. Everything's new. And when you feel like you're living out what God has asked you to do, it's something else. In the fall of 2016, I was leading my very first tour. One of the tour guides that I knew had a group, and he had like 3 days in Jerusalem, and he got sick. He's like, David, I know you want to do this. Why don't you go do this for a few days? Phenomenal. Loved it. Ending up the day's lessons, we climbed Temple Mount, and I'm standing probably 15 feet or so from where the Ark of the Covenant probably was cut. There's a mark where they cut it in, as Solomon says. And I'm teaching the stories of, this is the place where they bring the adulterous woman to Christ, and he bends down and writes in the dust. I mean, I'm standing on the stones that Herod put in place that probably Christ walked on. I'm walking by the entrance with the wall of partition, the Sorek, where Christ and his disciples are hanging out there one day, and a widow comes in and puts his 2 mites in the trumpet-based offering plate, and he says, it doesn't matter about the wealthy ones. She gave all that she could. I'm standing right there. And as I'm doing that, my phone buzzes. I reached in my pocket and just noticed it, and my clients decided to email me. I work from home, I have a consulting company. And they all decided that my services were no longer required. Pretty much at the same time. I have 5 kids. I'm living in a very expensive country. Israel is very expensive. Just the rent on our place was about $3,000 a month. Food is about twice as expensive as it is here. And I'm going, now? This is everything that I think I should be doing, God. What else can I do, right? How can I even do anything else? It's everything. I actually took a picture, and if you look at my eyes, they are dead, because I am dead inside. I've got to now lead a group the rest of the way. I actually took them through the valley of Gehenna, more because I just wanted to be there, because that's where I was in my head. Gehenna, I know you that got it. Christ only uses the word Gehenna for hell, so they never knew that, but never trust a tour guide. But I was like, how can this be? How can I be doing everything that God has asked of me? He's provided these clients for me. We were able to take my entire family there, and I can work and go to school, and all this is working out really well. I'm leading my very first tour. I'm standing outside the Holy of Holies. Come on. And probably as most audibly that I've ever heard God speak, he said, David, are you going to trust me or not? I came home. Obviously, I told my wife, there's only one place in Israel you go when you have problems, and that's the desert. You just go there. Because the desert is God's tough places. It's where he works. And I went down there and I walked. I never felt like I should leave. It's like, I don't feel like I should go home. My money's going to run out real fast, and do I hustle home really quick? Do I not? And it was about 2 weeks spanned. Out of the blue, one of the clients that I had worked with in the past said, hey, I just switched jobs, would love to bring you in. Can you be in office? I think it was in a week. I'm like, absolutely. They had no idea where I was at that point in time. So I catch a red eye back, land in Cincinnati, close a deal, obviously bigger than what I had before. That doesn't always work out that way, but for me it did. And it's like, are you going to trust me in this or not? How are we going to work in the future as a church? There's going to be tough times, there's going to be mountaintops, but will we trust him in the story? Because I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, what you will wear, because he's going to take care of it if we trust him. Moses is an interesting character. We see that he's raised outside of his home in the Pharaoh's house. Study the concept of putting a baby in the bulrushes and pulling a baby out of the bulrushes is a symbol of being a deity. That's why he's accepted into Pharaoh's house. And he's raised, but he's raised without a home, really. He's raised in a different language in some ways, a different culture, a different environment than what his people are in. Raised up through the academic circles, probably in a priestly line, so he's probably in the temples far more than we would be comfortable with in a lot of ways. But then we see him. He finally recognized that these are my people, and he sees the burden that they're putting on him by the slavery, and he sees the slave master doing things that he doesn't think is right and rises up in anger and kills him. And now he's running for his life. The children of Israel don't want him because he just made the Egyptians really mad at them. So he's now running for his life in the backside of the desert. So 40 years in a beautiful place and living in palaces and temples, and now he's in the backside of the desert without country, home, family, people. And for 40 years, he leads sheep around. Let's talk about a downgrade. If you want to look at a career trajectory, that's not a great way to be when you're in the backside of the desert, 40 years, wandering around. God's like, well, while you're here, learn the land. You're going to be back here leading people? So for 40 years, Moses wandered the exact same places that he leads the children of Israel. He knew every well, every mountain, every valley. He's been there, done that. He's like, yep, I've been there, lost a sheep over there. Don't go that way. He's been there. Moses thought he was just wandering around the desert leading sheep, and God's like, no. That sheep that ran away down that little area, I need you to find that water because you're going to remember you're going to need that spot. So Moses is spent 40 years in this, and God asks him a question at this qualification ceremony. He's like, what's in your hand? Like, this thing? I found this laying over there. You saw me pick it up. It's a stick. That's all it is. I lean on it occasionally, move sheep around with it. He's like, I can use that. David, as he's writing the Psalms, creates a beautiful concept of where he says, you have trained my hand for war. I could take you now through Israel and look at shepherds, especially the Bedouins. You want to talk about accuracy in stone throwing. It's nonstop. It doesn't matter if it's young girls or even boys. They are constantly throwing stones. A sheep goes that way, they'll throw a stone on the other side of it. Sheep goes that way, they'll throw a stone on that side. They're just constantly moving the sheep by throwing stones. It's crazy. Some of those, I saw older ladies just throw rocks at accuracy that you just have no idea how they do it. They do it all day. That's all they do. Well, for David, he had a sling. So that's how he would do it. Sheep's run off over there, a goat's going up the ridge, boom, right beside the goat, it skitters back. And that's all they do all day long. Isn't that amazing how God does that? I think David walks up to Goliath and goes, I'll just stand here. You stand there, I'll stand here, and boink. Why? He had trained him. God says, I've trained your hand for war. You know how to do this. And he asked Moses, what's in your hand? I asked the question of us as a Summitville community, what's in our hand? God's going to ask for it. And to a mother, it may be a young baby in your arms. We've talked about dedications and baptisms and what's in our hand. Maybe it's as a dad, it's my young boys who are coming up, as the psalmist writes, it's like quivers in the bow of a mighty warrior, sending them out to face and to push back the enemy. As a carpenter, it may be a carpenter bag. As a nurse, it may be a stethoscope or a medicine bag. But God's like, what's in your hand? So for Moses, he had to pick up the staff and lead. For the children of Israel, it required them to take what they took from the Egyptians and give it. For David, it was a sling. But then you begin to realize what God is actually providing. It changes the scenario to where we understand what is there and what our contribution is to it. Now, when we read what God asked of the children of Israel, what they're supposed to give, I skipped a few and made fun of a little bit. Put this back into their mindset and read which ones that you could contribute. Can you give gold, silver, bronze, purple, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and fine linen? Maybe, most likely not. Can you give goat hair, ram skins dyed with red? Most likely. Oh, by the way, goat, sorry, I need you. They had those. Doesn't that sound oddly out of scope of the project? I need all these amazing things, but I need some durable leather, ram skins, and acacia wood. Oh, there's an acacia tree right there. Got that one. I got a few. It's amazing how God will ask for things. There's some things God's going to ask, and we're going to go, I have no idea. $1 billion? You got some leather? You got some wood? I'm going to need that too. God's going to ask what's in your hand, and you're going to go, I can do that. It may not seem much, but I guarantee you that cathedral is not going to stand without some wood and some leather. He's like, I need you. What's in your hand to do this? Because God's providing far more than we can ask or think, but we also have to give what's in our hands. As we were coming back from Israel, we had a problem. We had no place to go. Fairly big problem, especially for my wife. I was so busy wrapping up my final semesters and trying to maximize every moment, learning the land and just being there, that I couldn't think about it. To me, it was like, God, I have no ability to help out in this situation. It's yours. If we have to get a hotel when we come back, we will, and then figure out where we're going to go. But obviously, my wife was far more concerned than I was. So she was... is more in the back of Craigslist and Facebook, but she was scanning through all these places to rent, and she found the perfect location, a small farmette, plenty of bedrooms for our kids, beautiful spot in the country, messaging the owner, And the message comes back, we're sorry, a big ag company wants to use it to store machinery, off the market. Nothing. Now less than 2 weeks. We have our tickets bought, we're coming no matter what. And my wife is very concerned, and I'm beginning to feel a little anxious myself. And out of the blue, she receives a phone call, which is very rare when you live overseas. Most of the time it's messages or WhatsApp or whatever. She receives a phone call from the owner of the place that had previously been off the market and saying, hey, by the way, if you're interested in this place, it's still available. See, God's will, if he asks of it, he'll always provide. And I'm reminded of the verse that says, my boundary lines have fallen in pleasant places. If you can wake up every morning and realize what God has provided and that your boundary lines are in pleasant places, life is a whole lot easier. I took that picture last night. I asked the question here, how is God moving here? We have a legacy. We've heard the stories. We've heard the stories of a few ladies that got together and prayed and things would happen, of how a church needed to move and a location opens up, of how buildings are being built. And if you look at what's in our hand, it's amazing. For the size we are, the things that have happened in the past, and now we're relaunching in the 5-year. There's a lot that God has put in our hand. I also look at the miraculous things that he's put into place. Maybe not a global power and a resource of a religion that gives gifts to the gods, but look at all the resources sitting around here. We've seen it up front this morning and around, and the people taking responsibilities and taking action. You want to talk about God orchestrating for thousands of years, just figure out what the percentage of it is that you were ever born. It's actually 1 in the trillions. And now put that all together where you guys got married, and then you guys had kids, and now you all end up here in Summitville on a Sunday later than it should be afternoon. And just realize what God is doing. And God is orchestrating it all. Have you ever even looked at the foundation of what this church is built on? Have you ever walked around the church and looked at the foundation? And we're built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets. Jesus Christ himself as the cornerstone. I asked the question earlier that the rabbis asked, what would prevent God from filling the space? What would prevent God from dwelling in the tabernacle? And they only could come up with one answer: if they never build it. God has one request. He's like, if you create a space, I'll fill it. We now have to take everything that God has given us and say, okay, God, we're going to step back. We're going to prepare a place. Set a place, the time, the energy, the effort, the money. He's got that. It's not a problem. Set apart a little bit of our lives and say, okay, we're going to create a space because we know if we create this space, he will fill it. The Lord is my strength and song. He's become my salvation. He is my God, and I will prepare him a habitation, my Father's God, and I will exalt him. Let's stand. Father God, thank you so much for your blessings. We don't deserve it. We're just slaves out of Egypt. But you have orchestrated in our lives miracles upon miracles, things that we can't comprehend. And right now, we just dedicate it back to you. Help us to get out of the way. Help us to create a space here in Summitville where you come and dwell in it. That the fire of God will be felt throughout the community, and we can worship you out of a heart of love, because we are built, and you are the foundation, the cornerstone of what we do. In Messiah's name, amen.